Welcome to the 5G Guys podcast, the best resource for newcomers and industry insiders alike to explore not just 5G, but anything technology and telecommunications. We explore and discuss technology with guests of varying backgrounds and expertise to help you learn and stay current. So let's dive right in. Welcome the 5G Guys themselves, hosts Dan McVaugh and Wayne Smith.
Welcome to Season 4 premiere of the 5G Guys podcast. I'm Wayne Smith and joined by my co-host, Dan McVaugh.
Hey everyone, welcome back for another season of the 5G Guys podcast. I'm excited for another season and looking forward to a lot more great episodes and great guest appearances. Wayne and I thought we'd kick off Season 4 by just doing some general technology and industry updates, some of our thoughts as we head into the last few weeks of 2023 and start off the new year in 2024. So let's just kind of dive in, Wayne. What's top of mind for you as we sort of look at where we're at today?
Well, I think since we're towards the tail end of the year, we should talk about 5G progress. How did the year shape up of 2023 and where are we at?
Yeah, I mean, it's the most common question I still get is, how are we doing on 5G and when is 5G going to deliver what it promised? So as far as progress in the U.S. goes, I think the best way I'd summarize it is what we saw was T-Mobile kind of lead the charge with getting the bulk of their network covered with 5G, and AT&T and Verizon trying to catch up and do the same. And I think they're still trying to do that. I think T-Mobile's reported that they'll be at about 300 million pops covered by the end of the year. So that's, more or less the bulk of the U.S. Large population centers at least. And AT&T and Verizon are just sort of behind the eight ball because they had a slow start with their C-band predicament they had finished in 2022 and a little delay in getting built out. So I think AT&T is predicting there'll be about 200 million pops covered on their C-band by the end of the year, and Verizon about 250 million pops. So a little bit behind T-Mobile, but that's kind of the take. So really Verizon and AT&T are just trying to still get coverage, whereas T-Mobile's now got coverage and is really focused on making the network play well and add capacity to where they need more capacity on their 5G network. That's really my takeaway where we're at this point.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think the C-band presented, they put a lot of emphasis at the end of 2022 into 2023, getting it deployed. They still have a ways to go, and I think we'll see a lot of that C-band deployment go through 2024, maybe through the whole year. And my take from it, I guess from a vendor perspective in 2023, we've had a lot of ups and downs in the industry a bit, like a lot of pullback. I think a lot of that's probably related, and this is speculation, but related to inflation-based. Mm-hmm. The cost of doing business has definitely went up, and it has impacted the ability to build. Also, though, if we take one step back to 5G in the early days, you and I, when we were talking about 5G, we knew that this big infrastructure spend of 15, 16 billion a year, 5G did hold the promise of a lower capital spend for deployment. Mm-hmm. And I think we're actually seeing that come to fruition. We've been used to in the industry for these giant capital spends every year. 2023 seems the first year that we're starting to see a little pullback. Now, I'm not sure what the final numbers were. They were still quite high, but they weren't 2022 levels, but they were probably a drop. And then we'll probably see that continued drop into 2024.
Right.
And so it is coming true. The cost to deploy 5G is a little cheaper. We have a lot of, we still have a lot of macro coverage out there, but overall, to your point, it's everywhere. Mm-hmm. And we've reached that level of parity of coverage, no matter where you're at in the country.
Yeah.
With all.
Yeah. And of course, we've talked about this throughout the year. Verizon and T-Mobile did a really pretty good job of deploying fixed wireless access using that same 5G network to get home internet service to people to compete with the cable and DSL phone providers for broadband internet to the home. So they did a great job. I think AT&T is just now starting to scratch the surface on that. AT&T's reported in their quarterly earnings for the third quarter that they hope to to hit about 30 markets by the end of the year with their fixed wireless access. So that's another part of 5G in a different use case that we also saw this year.
It's definitely a good topic. Something we probably should research is wonder what the ARPU is for fixed wireless versus wireless.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, because it's readily available. And I have heard more and more people that I talk to, just every day on the street, they're jumping on the fixed wireless broadband wagon.
Right.
And so it'd be an interesting comparison because it's both wireless, just different types of, I guess, customer set, if you would, right?
Yeah. Yeah. By the way, so ARPU for listeners is average revenue per user. So it's how the industry sort of tracks, how much they're making for each subscription customer. And over the years, you go back to 1G, ARPU was in the hundreds of dollars per user. And so over time, it's kind of progressively gone down. And we've talked about that, right? As consumers, we get a lot more for our money. And it's one of the few things that the price for us to get our cell phone service has consistently stayed level or even gone down over time. So that's a challenge these carriers have, right? Is continuing to spend billions of dollars every year on capital with a declining average revenue per user. So it's definitely an issue to keep an eye on. We'll definitely try to see if we can look at that as a later episode.
Yeah, it's like 40 some dollars. I think it's in the 40 range now,
Mm-hmm.
ARPU, compared to your point. So that's half.
Yeah.
But it's super interesting. I think from a vendor perspective and the pullback in 2023 for 5G, it's not full steam ahead for any of the carriers. I think Verizon's had their, a couple, I don't want to say it redirections and changes, but they're re-looking at priorities and making sure the capital spent meets the network need. Where maybe in a few years ago we were just building fiber, we were building sites to get, to meet a different objective, I guess. I think Dish, to your point earlier, has made their initial rollout in 5G, and then what's next for them.
Right. Right. Yeah, that's been interesting because I have yet to see any marketing by Dish actually selling service. I haven't seen any commercials. I haven't seen any ads. No stores popping up. I don't even know anybody that uses Dish service. Now, I'm not saying it doesn't exist. I just haven't seen it.
Yeah, I haven't either. I mean, I did. I thought I did. Maybe we did talk about one use case for IoT on their network.
Mm-hmm. Right.
More that versus a voice or a consumer based product.
Exactly. And I really think that's what I want to keep an eye on with Dish is there's been talk from the get-go when they started talking about building out of being a white label carrier where they just sell access bits and bandwidth to other carriers to augment those other carriers' networks. So you might think you're using T-Mobile's network, but you're actually using Dish's network, for example, things like that. So I want to keep an eye on that wholesale, and also want to keep an eye on, like you said, industrial IoT type. Are they going to be more of a B2B provider of service versus a consumer service provider? Because right now I don't see anything on the consumer front for them.
Yeah, me neither.
Yeah. The other thing that I think was interesting to look at with regard to, the 5G progress, and this is probably the biggest question I get is, use cases, and I'm disappointed. Like 5G didn't do anything for me. Like that's probably the most common thing I hear. And I think that a lot of what I've recognized this year is that these 5G networks are standalone networks, meaning it's radio frequency and core network in the background that's operating as a completely separate network from the 4G networks. And I think what that causes for anytime that we have these new generations of technology, there's sort of this break-in period where it's buggy, there's some issues that have to be worked out. And because it's a standalone network from 4G, what happens is your phone might get stuck on a 5G network that is not working well, and it doesn't switch back over to a 4G network that might actually perform better. It's sort of like if you've experienced your phone stuck on a crappy Wi-Fi connection and you got to turn your Wi-Fi off to get it over to cellular or 4G so you can do what you want to do. It's sort of like that same dynamic, I think, is going on. And I've seen numerous reports of people just turning their 5G off on their phone and just staying on 4G in certain parts of the network where they're just having a lot of 5G problems. And so that's an interesting observation that I've seen this year, and I think that'll get worked out. We're about 5 years into the deployment, which is about, in my experience, when we start to see things really start performing. That's one of the biggest observations I've made.
Yeah, I've had a lot of travel this year, and so I have a new phone, a 14, I think, 5G, and I've been to, 20, 30 cities,
Hmm.
probably this year's travel for work and pleasure, and I haven't had those kind of 5G issues. Not that I would, normally that it would make me take pause to think about. And overall, but I do think when we talk about 5G, is it truly going to be that much better than the 4G because it was so good at the end of its reign, right?
Uh,
And then the business enterprise use of it. I definitely think use cases are starting to come up more and more, and that's just unfortunate the way the consumer sees those kinds of improvements. Hopefully, it's through once we get through the inflationary period, better costs for product, better agriculture, better manufacturing and shipping, all of those types of things. It's really hard to measure if you're a consumer.
right, right. And like you'd alluded to earlier, I think the primary, I'll call it use case, but the primary reason the carriers leaned so heavily into 5G was it is just a lot more affordable on sort of a price per bit basis to roll out and manage these 5G networks than prior generations. And so there was a big business incentive for the carriers to try to get 5G rolled out and get as much traffic onto those 5G networks as they can, because long term it's going to be better for the business. But for sure, the biggest use case has been the fixed wireless access. It's given the carriers a pathway to sell new services to home internet users that they didn't have before by leveraging these 5G networks. By far the biggest use case in the US.
Yeah, yeah. And I think it'll just pick up steam,
Hmm.
you know.
I actually saw a report that said pretty much year to date for 2023, all of the new broadband additions of homes getting broadband for the first time were almost all predominantly attributed to fixed wireless access.
Woo.
So the net additions that the traditional internet providers got were just people changing companies, switching from Xfinity to Charter, or from Xfinity to their DSL phone internet provider, and that the new net adds were predominantly fixed wireless access. That's impactful.
Well, that's what's great about this new season. I think we have a few guests coming up with, in our drops to talk about fixed wireless.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, it'll be great. But just to be clear, the number of fixed wireless access internet users is a small percentage of the total homes using broadband in the United States right now. So they're just scratching the surface in terms of the total percentage of users.
This episode of 5G Guys is brought to you by Vertex Innovations. For almost 20 years, Vertex has been building the nation's wireless and broadband networks. Providing project management, network engineering, and construction oversight are just some of the ways Vertex helps its clients. So, if you're in need of a partner to help you with your wireless network designs, construction, implementation, or operations, reach out to Vertex. You can find them at vertex-us.com.
Another good topic in 2023, as we look at the spectrum, how do you think private networks have done this year? It's one of those subjects that we think there's a great potential for it, and it is for some enterprises, depending on scale and really how much money they have to
Uh-huh.
deploy. But,
Uh-huh.
have you heard as much around that space, or is it kind of dropped off a bit?
Well, I don't know that I'd say it's dropped off, but it definitely didn't get sort of the launch off the launch pad that we thought we were going to see. I really thought we were going to see a lot in that space, and there's definitely activity. I've seen community broadband projects that were based on private internet. I'm definitely seen industrial applications, but just not to the degree I thought we would see it. And I think that's kind of a combination of the 5G technology still maturing in combination with where we ended up economically this year overall. Like businesses had to kind of focus on their core business, and not a great year to spend capital on a new experimental, product for their business.
Very, very true. With you mean with the promise of the recession,
Hmm.
and then
Right.
the soft landing, and as a business owner trying to figure out, all right, which is it? Is it both? Or yeah, I would agree. That's a good takeaway.
Yeah, I mean, let's just take, I don't know, an Amazon warehouse that's using Wi-Fi right now to enable the robots to automate factory processes. The desire to be forward thinking and deploy a private, maybe 5G network to replace that, they don't really need it yet. It's just sort of, was it time to try to experiment with it this year, or just continue to work with what's working today and maybe wait till, business is a little better and the promise of the market's a little better. So that's kind of what I think, but that's pure speculation. But definitely we have seen Swiss, now that we're talking about that economically, we've talked about it throughout the year and it's still there. The telecom industry is definitely in, I don't know if you call it a recession, but it's down. It's down. Layoffs in almost every company that we know of, not
Hmm.
just carriers, but the companies that sell equipment to those carriers, right?
Yeah, yeah, it's been pretty dramatic, and then I think also the adoption of just-in-time purchase orders,
Hmm.
where lack of the ability for a vendor or these support companies to forecast until the last minute, which then then you run into issues with supply chain,
Hmm.
right? So I think those are challenging. Those are challenges that a lot of us in the industry haven't had to deal with, and now we're trying to make our businesses fit into a new just-in-time purchasing model.
Hmm.
And I get where the carriers are; they can't overpromise, to their vendors because they're not sure which direction they have to pivot to still remain competitive. Is it fixed wireless? Is it, C band? Or do they have a greater, or, they build a longer timeline to deploy C band? So those are all questions, I think. And, one of the things that we haven't gotten into yet is how have the carrier's strategy for each technology really worked? You don't really hear a lot about that on the outside, but we know that deploying any kind of technology comes with bugs and problems, and
Hmm.
oh, maybe that wasn't what we thought it would
Hmm.
be. I think some of that has happened within this year, and with the strategies. Oh, we were going to do this, and maybe they just weren't optimized, or they didn't see the return on investment as they
Hmm.
thought they were. And so that just in time funding deals with the economy. What does that do for the industry? It definitely hurts the vendors
Right.
because you can't forecast. And then if you don't have a forecast and you don't have commitments, it gets into the hiring mix. How do you hire enough folks to do it? And then without long term lead items, how do you deal with supply chain issues if you have to build things? So the economy it'll play out this year. I mean, I still think it's going to be a rough, slow road to
Hmm.
at least for first quarter next year,
Yeah.
from my perspective.
The one thing that when 5G early on, what you saw was at least two of the three carriers, Verizon, AT&T, were really going to focus on millimeter wave, right? Like the super high frequency, high bandwidth that could like really deliver. This was the super highway analogy we use for 5G, right? And T-Mobile focused on low band because they could roll it out really fast and they would have really good coverage. And so T-Mobile did that originally, and AT&T and Verizon started trying to do millimeter wave. What really happened and where we're at today is they're all focused on mid band. We talked about C band, which is what Verizon and AT&T predominantly are using. T-Mobile is using predominantly 2.5 gigahertz, which is slightly lower frequency than the 3.6 gigahertz, 3.7 gigahertz C band. And I think that's what they've all realized is that's the perfect compromise where they get the higher bandwidth, the more lanes in the road, not quite like millimeter wave, but they also get a little better coverage, a lot better coverage actually than millimeter wave. And so, but what I think you are seeing though is that mid band coverage is not quite as good as what we've all been used to with traditional 3G and 4G networks that are in lower bands. Those lower frequency bands, they can penetrate walls, they can go through trees better than you can with mid band. And so when I hear a lot of people say, "Hey, it seems like my 5G coverage has gotten worse." Well, you know what? It might have, because 5G is on a slightly higher frequency band now, might not cover as well as what you've been used to. So that cell site in your neighborhood that used to cover your home office well might not cover your home office as well with the C band or the 2.5 mid band that T-Mobile's using. So that's the one thing that I think I did take out of this year was I think all the carriers really have narrowed in on, for now, mid band is their 5G focus. And so now they just have to optimize their deployments around that.
Gotcha. Yeah, it makes sense. That's kind of some of the rumblings that I guess I had heard too. Said a better way by you using the analogy of the highway of it. But I think, all of us in anywhere out there, expectations, we as a society, our expectations is so off the charts. What we want, and we got so used to the Moore's law, doubling, to not everything's going to work that way. Mm-hmm. And we're going to make some mistakes in deploying this new technology and how it's used in the use cases, and some of it's going to work really well and others haven't yet to be developed. So I think that's a fair statement to say.
You're spot on. The advent of the smartphone and 4G at the same time really spoiled us as consumers. Like, it was such a huge step function in what we got as consumers that we kind of thought, well, the next one's going to be similar, and it's just not been that way. But kind of shifting focus a little bit, we've talked a little bit about the cable companies. It's actually been a pretty big year for them as well. So one of the things the cable companies have been really focused on this year is they've all made a big move into selling mobile phone service as mobile virtual network operators, meaning buying wholesale data from companies like Verizon, AT&T, T-Mobile, and using their networks to sell mobile phone service to their customers as part of a bundle to attract and retain their base customers that are, maybe getting cable internet or cable TV or whatever the case might be. That was a huge addition for the big guys this year, Charter, Comcast especially. I would say almost half of from the research analyst research I've seen, almost half of the mobile net additions in Q3 from earnings, in the Q3 earnings, were by cable companies. That's pretty impactful.
Well, it is, and it's kind of like if you sit there and take a step back, just as we talk about fixed wireless, the wireless carriers are poaching their customers. And so, hey, one of the things that someone told me, and I don't know true, I know that they use the MVNO model, all right, but Comcast, they're actually creating their own network in some areas, and they're not using traffic on Verizon or AT&T or T-Mobile, are they?
Well, they're trying to use CBRS spectrum to deploy networks. And they also have their Wi-Fi, huge ecosystem of Wi-Fi deployments. So all these Wi-Fi routers out there that are on the cable broadband. So they're trying to offload traffic from Verizon's network as an MVNO onto that Wi-Fi network. And they're experimenting deploying their own network using CBRS spectrum for that same reason. But they're literally just in the R&D stage right now. They've done some trial deployments in some small markets to see how it'll work. And, do they want to build and operate their own cellular network? That's a huge undertaking. And so I think they're just playing around with it to see if there's any viability to it.
Yeah, pretty impressive, though. Those are good numbers. When you look at the customers that Verizon lost to the ones that Charter and Comcast gained.
Right.
It's
well,
starting to...
But here's the thing. Verizon didn't lose those customers because, think about it, Xfinity is buying access to Verizon's network to serve those customers.
Yeah.
Right? So Verizon's still getting revenue from those customer losses.
Crazy.
It's a lower ARPU, right?
Yeah.
Because they're selling that bandwidth wholesale. So it's an interesting... What's going to be interesting to me is to see how the carriers embrace or not embrace that wholesale model as we go into the next couple of years as part of their revenue base, right? Do they embrace continuing this MVNO model with their competitors, or do at some point they draw the line and stop doing that to try to stop losing customers and keep their ARPU higher?
Well, I think a natural response is to put up the walls. Mm-hmm. But, you could also take the flip side. Are we going to see in the next 5 to 10 years large M&A activity between cable and wireless actually coming together, and then regulatory allowing that to happen to be a better, because it would that in itself would drive somewhat cost down for the consumer.
That would be really interesting to see a merger of like a Charter and a Verizon or something. That'd be huge. That's interesting. Keep an eye on it. Well, the other thing this points to is going back a much higher level. When you look at companies like Apple and Google, their whole view of this ecosystem is they see a world where users don't know or care what network they're even on. The network becomes sort of agnostic and behind the scenes, and the brands that we know today of Verizon and Charter and Xfinity kind of are gone, and really you're just using devices from companies like Google and Apple, and you don't know or care whose network you're on. We've definitely moved closer towards that over the last 5 years.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, and they had the piggy bank.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, a super large market cap.
Right.
I mean, Apple is $3 trillion, and I know that Google a little bit different. That they're starting to feel pressure in search because of AI and different technologies, and so it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. I've been in the infrastructure space my career, and took a lot of pride in our people building this infrastructure, and it's hard to believe that it just becomes so commonplace that it's gone. You know what I mean? It's just hard for me to fathom that, but you just never know how the world comes together. I get the dual SIM cards, the eSIMs. They're kind of changing the technology by manufacturing the devices, right?
Right. Right. Yeah. And that's going to enable things like private networks and the ability to switch networks much easier. T-Mobile announced this year, and I haven't seen if they've actually pulled it off, the ability to try their network for a month using your second SIM on your phone, your eSIM, without having to leave the carrier you're on now. So use that eSIM,
Wow.
activate on T-Mobile, use it for a little bit, see if you like it better, and then switch. Like, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it is. It is.
Yeah.
That'd be a good way.
Yeah.
I
Well,
know. Yeah,
also
go ahead.
before we leave on the cable front, I don't know if a
Yeah.
lot of people know this. The only way people know this is from the stupid Xfinity commercials that came out in the Super Bowl, the beginning of the year, where they announced their 10G network. And I
Yeah.
got so many people confused about that. They're like, we're skipping from 5G to 10G. And do I need to switch my service to Xfinity now, like to keep ahead of the times? And I was like, I was rolling my eyes that the marketing guys confusing the hell out of people in terms of what's the technology behind it. All that was them talking about their evolution of their cable network, their cable broadband network, to be able to provide 10 gig service. But they kind of purposely are trying to confuse people, I think, with this 10G, comparing it to 5G and 4G. And that's one thing that I observed. But there is actually some substance behind it, because what the cable guys have been focused on this year is it's sort of their version of 5G on the cable internet plant. It's called DOCSIS 4.0, not to get too geeky, but they're in the process of upgrading their cable internet plant to their next generation of technology, which is going to provide significantly more throughput to your home over your cable internet or to your business or whatever. So that's kind of behind the scenes, and the public doesn't really see a lot about that, but that's going on at the same time.
Yeah, that's super interesting. When you the marketing piece of it, I think over time, that marketing it blurs so many lines, but we have to understand what it's for. It's not only for the consumer, it's for these large companies to raise capital in the public market.
Mm-hmm.
It's to start to frame their vision of the future. And so we're confused by the acronyms, and we're really expecting a big leap in technology, and it just might not be there yet, to your point.
Right. Yeah.
You know.
So sorry I cut you off. Where were you going? There was something else you were going to hit on.
Oh, yeah. No, I know that we're getting, pretty long into our show here, and this is the season 4 premiere. So do you want to drop any things, before we go this place, or do we cover everything you wanted to cover?
Well, I mean, there's always lots of stuff. I could go on and on about what's going on the tech space. We've talked about satellite being used for cell phone service direct from satellite. There's all the crazy things that Elon Musk is always doing, but But I mean, we'll have episodes to tackle a lot of those topics to give some hints. Like you said, we'll have some folks from some of the big companies that are behind these technologies like fixed wireless access. Some interesting use cases of how wireless is being used in ways that I never imagined. We've got some pretty cool guests coming up for that. But I think
Mm-hmm.
some of the big news is we're going to go full video starting this season. We've embraced YouTube and the fact that it's the most used platform for podcasts, and people want to see our faces and they want to see us talking. So we're going to give that a shot and embrace, and hopefully our faces made for video don't scare everyone away, right?
I totally. Yeah, I never thought I'd be in front of a camera, but it's been super exciting and it's been a great journey. So I'm looking forward to it. If that's what we need to do, I'm all about it.
Well, we'll see.
And, and to your point, so we ought to cover this. It's so close. What do you think of the holiday season's going to bring for the carriers? Is it going to be a good year? Is there any technology that everybody needs to have? I just don't know,
I think it's just going to be kind of average. I don't see, some years, for example, there's a new iPhone or a new Android phone that's just like a leaps and bounds improvement over a prior model. I don't see that going on. I don't see, I just don't see any sort of revolutionary thing going on with the carriers or any products or any launches of, when we built out our 2G network in the mid 90s, when I worked for Sprint, we launched that network, one of the first nationwide digital networks in the US, right before the holidays. Huge,
oh, wow.
Right?
Yeah, huge.
The holidays have always been a benchmark to try to do those kinds of things. I don't see anything like that this year.
Yeah, interesting. I always wondered, there's always deals. I'm getting all kinds of emails to go get a free phone or something, but the phones are just so good. My 14's good. You know.
This is the time to do it, though. If you think you might want to switch carriers, you want to get new phones, this is the best time of year to do it. So if you're in the market, I would do it now.
Well, perfect. I can't think of anything else. I'm like you said, there's all kinds of industry, things that are always happening, but still a really resilient industry.
Absolutely. Well, thanks, man. Looking forward to another season, and thanks for joining us as always, everyone. And we'll look forward to a great season. Take care.
All right, take care.
Thanks for listening to the 5G Guys. For more resources and to connect with Dan and Wayne, check out their website at 5gguys.com. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to hit that follow button and share this episode with your friends and family.